So I think we'll go ahead and call the Transportation and Commerce Committee hearing to order. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderwoman Tyus. Alderwoman Spencer.
Present.
Alderman Narayan.
Here.
Alderwoman Velasquez. Alderman Browning. Chair Cone. Alderwoman Tyus. Alderwoman Velasquez. Alderman Browning. Chair Cone. We have 2 present.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. With that, I want to just set the stage for today. We're going to be hearing board bills number 33 and 34, both pertaining to short-term rentals here in the city of St. Louis. We are not planning on taking a vote today. The purpose of this hearing will be to continue to have public comment and to hear from our planning division as well as our police department. So with that, following the full order of business here, I will defer the approval of minutes, recognizing we don't have quorum, and go right into our order of our board bills for review. Board bill number 33 and 34, we'll take them up at the same time. Alderman Narayan, you're recognized on those 2 board bills.
Thank you, Vice Chair Spencer. Just to reiterate, I see we have Alderman Browning on now. So just to reiterate, I'm not seeking to amend these board bills today or introduce a committee substitute or to pass them out of committee. Simply looking to give the general public another opportunity to weigh in on these board bills, as well as to give the committee an opportunity to hear from both the Planning Commission and the Police Department. This is kind of a complicated issue because we have to let the Planning Commission move ahead of us, basically. So at this point, if I believe Don Rowe was on earlier, I see him. Mr. Rowe, if you're available to put the presentation on that the Planning Commission got, I would appreciate it.
Well, I'll just speak up and say Miriam Keller, now on the screen, is the member of the Planning Commission and PDA staff that's going to make the presentation.
Oh, great. Then Ms. Keller, if you could. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you hear me?
I can.
Great. I'm also going to share my screen, make sure you can see it.
Well, they
Can you
should
see my
be
screen?
sworn in. Am I correct?
That's
It certainly couldn't hurt.
yeah, I think city employees not necessarily, but I think
Oh,
Madam Clerk,
there's, okay, no problem.
we can, yeah. Miriam, Ms. Keller, you're recognized to continue your presentation for us today.
Okay, great. And you can see my screen. Just want to make sure the graphics are visible.
Looks great.
Okay, great. Well, good afternoon, members of the Transportation and Commerce Committee. My name is Miriam Keller, and I'm with the Planning and Urban Design Agency. Also on the line here this afternoon with me are Executive Director of PDA, Don Rowe, who was just speaking, and as well as one of our colleagues in the zoning section, Evan Winkler, and we really worked as a team on this. So this afternoon, I'm sharing the presentation provided to the Planning Commission on May 10th of this year about the proposed zoning text change regarding short-term rentals. As you know, one of the Planning Commission's duties is to review all zoning amendments and rezonings and provide their recommendations and findings to the Board of Aldermen. And so, as Alderman Narayan referenced, that is exactly what the Planning Commission was doing as they were reviewing this presentation. And I'll add that because the Planning Commission's authority really only extends to the zoning piece of the 2 board bills before you, this presentation focuses just on that zoning text amendment as presented in Board Bill 34. And I'll note that the Planning Commission held a public hearing on these regulations at its regular April meeting and then voted to indeed recommend them to the Board of Aldermen at its May meeting. So with that background, I'll begin this presentation. first with an overview of what it is that the zoning text amendment in Board Bill 34 does. And in the simplest terms, it does two things. So first, it establishes a number of key definitions associated with short-term rentals as a land use. And then number two, it does permit the use in all districts, but, and with a big but here, subject to additional regulations, in effect, creating a legal pathway, both for the operation of short-term rentals as well as for their regulation. And the bulk of those regulations, as you know, are proposed in Board Bill 33. And Board Bill 33 proposes those regulations to be, those would be codified outside of the zoning code in Title 25, rather than in the zoning code, which is Title 26 of our code. And the reason for this is that this structure of these two board bills would allow for the use of the building commissioner's powers in quickly and responsively revoking permits if the conditions of those permits are violated. In contrast, permits tied to conditions in the zoning code, say as in the case of a conditional use permit, would go through a much longer process that would be less responsive or swift in dealing with nuisance issues. And I'll say that key elements that allow for that revocation process are actually set by state law, so that those timing considerations are set by state law, many of them. And so this is kind of the reason that most of those regulations are proposed to be set outside of the zoning code, and the reason that this board bill related to the zoning text amendment is a little bit more narrow in scope. And a quick aside here that Board Bill 34, which is the one dealing with zoning regulations, is written in such a way that it would not go into effect unless and until a permitting system and related regulations go into effect. So what are the definitions being proposed? There are 9 identified in the board bill and the regulations recommended by the Planning Commission. But 2 of these, the definitions related to signs and dwelling units, actually just simply restate existing definitions in the code and kind of capture them into this new chapter about short-term rental uses. So I've highlighted in blue on the screen here just some key elements of each definition. I'm not going to read through each, but want to highlight some key things. So the first definition, short-term rental, is being established as a lodging use. And in this definition, you see the distinctions between this use and other potential lodging uses. So not a bed and breakfast, and not a home exchange for which there is no payment. It also, in the definition, sets a term of 30 days or less, and in the definition itself requires that the short-term rental use is permitted to operate pursuant to a current and valid permit on file with the city. The second definition, short-term rental unit, refers to a dwelling unit in whole or in part, and that will be relevant here in a moment. And then there are these 2 definitions. Short-term rental occupied means a short-term rental unit being used as the principal residence by either the owner or a tenant or lessee of the owner authorized to operate the short-term rental. And then the second definition, short-term rental non-occupied, refers to a short-term rental unit not being used as a principal residence. So I do want to spend a moment discussing the difference between occupied and non-occupied, these 2 definitions here, with some simple graphics that our team created, since these are proposed to be regulated in different ways in Board Bill 33. So the key distinction, as you saw in the definitions themselves, is between dwelling units which are being used as a principal residence. So I'll use blue to kind of indicate properties being used as a principal residence, and those not being used as a principal residence here in orange. And you can imagine, short-term rentals could be operated out of both, but they are defined differently or proposed to be defined differently. So, for example, say you're renting out your home as a short-term rental unit, but your home that you live in as your principal residence. You could be the owner of the property or a lessee with the owner's permission to operate a short-term rental. And this would be an example of an occupied short-term rental. I'm going to provide a few examples here. This was something that was helpful to our planning commission and really unpacking the differences in these definitions. And so even if it's just a bedroom or two of your home that you are renting as a short-term rental, that still falls under that occupied definition. But say you own a property down the street or really anywhere in the city, but you don't live in it. If it is rented as a short-term rental, but not used as your principal residence, it would fall under that non-occupied short-term rental definition. And in Board Bill 33, these are capped at 4 units per applicant. Here are a couple more scenarios. Say you own a 4-unit building and live in one of those units, but rent out the other 3 as short-term rentals. Those other 3 here in orange would fall under that non-occupied definition. Or say you have an accessory dwelling unit on your property. As long as it does have cooking and bathroom facilities, it could be rented as a short-term rental. But again, since it's not your principal residence, it falls under that non-occupied short-term rental definition and falls under that 4 permits per applicant cap. So I'm going to continue through with the other definitions before discussion, but I wanted to spend a little bit of time there. That was helpful to our planning commission as they were reviewing this. Here are the 3 final definitions being proposed in Board Bill 34. So short-term rental owner means the owner of record as reflected in the assessor records. Short-term rental agent refers to either a person or organization who is the operator who shall be available for and responsive to contact at all times as designated on the permit. That's part of the definition here. And in the case of those occupied short-term rentals, so all of those blue examples, this person shall be the principal resident themselves. And then short-term rental permit in the definition here is the permit issued by the building division of the city of St. Louis. And it goes on. So all of this established within the definitions and including this item here that non-occupied short-term rentals shall require a graduated business license to obtain that permit. And the proposed amendment in Board Bill 34 further states that short-term rentals subject to all of those additional regulations proposed to be established in Title 25 would be permitted in every zoning district, again, subject to those additional regulations. For the Planning Commission, we also want to provide a little bit more context about where this use, to the best of our knowledge anyhow, is operating in our city today in an unregulated fashion. So for this use, or this analysis, I should say, we used AirDNA data, and this is a third-party data source that kind of scrapes short-term rental listing data from listing services like Airbnb and VRBO and consolidates that data into one location. And so the map you see on the screen, each of the black points reflects the rough location of all listing data from the previous 12 months as of March. Not all of these were necessarily active rentals at the time that we pulled the data. This is just reflects listing data from the previous 12 months. And so we overlaid these on top of our zoning districts, our zoning map to see roughly where are these operating relative to zoning districts. And you can see that really they're operating currently in an unregulated way in just about every zoning district, excluding L, which is the Jefferson Memorial District, but are most prevalent in areas zoned A, single family, B, 2-family, and C and D, multiple family dwelling. And those are kind of the light yellow, somewhat darker yellow, and then the shades of orange on the map. And we also looked at how short-term rentals operate in the context of our city's strategic land use plan. And for those who aren't familiar, this is the land use component of our comprehensive plan and is used commonly by the Planning Commission as kind of the guiding document for land use decisions made by the city, including changes to the zoning code and zoning map. So what you see on this map are the 10 different, we call them strategic land use designations. These are assigned roughly at the block level. And each designation expresses kind of an intent for future character and development in each area. And these kind of land use designation descriptions are detailed in a separate document. But I'll summarize here to say that looking at where these uses are operating today, they really do operate just about in all strategic land use plan areas, excluding recreational open space preservation and development areas. Those are our parks, basically, and are most prevalent in areas designated neighborhood preservation area, which the character is intended as it sounds, preservation of kind of the existing character, but allowing for infill and corner commercial uses and a range of uses. And then also, and that's the yellow category here, and also specialty mixed use area, which is the blue. You can see the light blue, particularly in the central corridor. And these are the parts of the city that the strategic land use plan encourages, a dynamic mix of uses. Of course, employment centers, entertainment centers, and so on.
Miriam, if you go back to that map, just really quickly, my apologies for interrupting, but the difference between the orange and the yellow.
Yeah, so the yellow is designated neighborhood preservation area, and orange neighborhood development areas, and those are identified as areas with a high proportion of vacancy where infill and development are in particular encouraged.
Thank you.
Mhm. So this is actually my last slide here. Before closing, I just wanted to share a few of our staff comments on land use considerations that we shared with the Planning Commission when they were reviewing these about short-term rentals. So first, that they can, if adequately regulated, fit within the character of a broad range of those strategic land use plan designations, even by complementing primarily residential areas in a way that supports neighborhood commercial activity and small business. And of course, they are very much complementary to major employment centers, entertainment amenities, tourism, neighborhood commercial, and so on. Providing both temporary housing for individuals considering a job, and so on. But short-term rentals certainly do have the potential to compete with rental housing uses and home ownership opportunities, particularly in areas with high demand for housing and in areas near employment and entertainment centers. In the case here, we don't know specifically what those trends and impacts are, but a clear system for defining, permitting, and regulating short-term rentals, it's our hope that this would allow for ongoing evaluation of those impacts, both positive and negative. So with that, I will stop and invite either Executive Director Don Rowe or Plan Examiner Evan Winkler from the zoning section to add further comments or fill in anything I may have missed or just help answer the committee's questions.
Director Rowe, did you have anything to add? Or Mr. Winkler?
Hi, Evan Winkler, zoning plan examiner for the city of St. Louis. Just to reiterate Miriam's kind of first point that the benefit of placing the regulation portion in chapter 5 really does kind of alleviate or allows for a quicker response to problem properties. So hopefully that can benefit the city in making sure these uses stay relevant and important to the people who are both providing the service as well as using the service.
I'll just jump in quickly. It's Don Rowe, the Executive Director of the Planning and Urban Design Agency. Affirm that I'll tell the truth. And as Miriam outlined, we had a public hearing at the Planning Commission and great discussion and presentation, which you've seen the primary presentation. There's a resolution that attaches to that. And we voted it out, or the Planning Commission voted it out, and it's come before you. Commend Miriam on the detail and the clarity of her presentation.
Thank you, Director Rowe. Yeah, Miriam, thank you so much for coming before us here. With that, if you don't mind, I'd like to turn it over to the members of the committee who are present to ask any questions of you. Just for my clarity, this is primarily related to Board Bill 34 as opposed to 33 and the details of 33. Am I understanding that correctly, Miriam?
That's correct.
With that, I'd like to turn it over to members of the committee for any questions. We have Alderman Narayan, the sponsor. Did you have any questions or any additional thoughts you'd like to ask of Miriam before moving on?
I don't. I've had the opportunity to sit through this presentation twice now, so I don't have any questions and just want to commend her on a thorough presentation.
Okay, thank you. Alderman Browning.
Hi, yes. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was wondering if you all had a chance to view the white paper that the St. Louis Realtors put out and sent out this week.
Yes, a little bit. We received it yesterday, just yesterday.
Okay, and yeah, I was just reading through it today as well. And I just want to make sure we're covering all our bases. I'm very supportive of this work that you've all done. I really appreciate it, and I just want to make sure we cover all of our bases so that people can have faith in this and really make sure that it works the right way it's supposed to work. So under part 2 of that white paper, they have point 1 says that they feel like Bill 34 does not do what it purports to do, namely make short-term rentals a permitted use in all zoning districts. I'm not going to read the whole thing here. I think if you have it in your possession, I would just care to hear what your response to that is, and whether you feel that we need to add text that expressly permits the use of short-term rentals, or if you feel that that's just already the case and therefore it's not necessary.
Don, are you on mute?
I'll make two general observations. As Miriam said, we just got it yesterday, so our detailed look is pretty limited. And I think as we look at it, one, we'll also consult with the attorneys. But we're aware of issues of where it's distributed across the city. And we have the examples of where it has been used across the cities. And we'll dive into this a little bit deeper. But at the moment, what we have described as the definitions in the section of the code, chapter 26, it's pretty general in nature, and the specifics do come again in terms of operational of the uses in 34. So at the moment, until we dive deeper, that seems to be the division and methodology will do it. But from a land use perspective, we'll take a little bit deeper dive look at the zoning code and the districts.
And if I could just add, Alderman Browning, this is Frank Oswald. I spoke with Barbara Burkett yesterday, who's, the city councilor who's been involved with this. And, she feels that we could certainly add that language if we need it. But she was going to, discuss it with some of her colleagues, and we've certainly got some cleanup work to do as well on this before the last version is around. But we'll certainly take into consideration what they say and have the city councilor's approval at this point.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. I trust you all and I know that you know what you're doing. I want to just put that forward. That I trust your expertise on this. I really want to make sure this legislation does what it's intended to do. I think it's of vital importance to our city. And so I really appreciate all the work that's been put into this. And I just want to say thank you to you all for working so hard on this.
Thank you, Alderman Browning. Did you have any further questions?
No further questions at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Miriam, as I kind of stated on the front end, it looks like, I mean, from my understanding of your presentation, that this is primarily looking at Board Bill 34. Did planning take a look at Board Bill 33 and provide, was planning involved in the sort of construction of that ordinance as well? Or is that, were my questions really?
We weren't involved in a detailed way in the construction of Board Bill 33. We were really focused on this zoning piece and the discussion of just making sure we had the regulations in the right place to allow for that kind of responsive process around revoking permits if conditions were violated. So yeah, I don't know that we have the deep dive on 33 to offer, but I'll defer to others who.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, I think one of the things is the distinction between the amendment to Chapter 26 went to the Planning Commission with the full work and involvement of Planning Commission staff, PDA, to do the resolution that reviewed the amendment, the text amendments to the zoning code, and was approved at the Planning Commission. As you mentioned, has planning staff been involved in the overall team? Absolutely. So keeping an eye on being connected to what happens in 34, yes. Frank mentioned the city council's office, of course, in the drafting of the two board bills and the nature of that, much of that work was done by the city councilor with the advice of professional staff like you see here with Evan and Miriam and several others, whether they're from PDA or zoning.
Thank you. Okay. Alderman Narayan, did you want to proceed with your presentation?
Yes, I guess if we could get the screen back. I'm not sure what the police department is going to want, but I believe we have Lieutenant Colonel Chrisman on from the police department to discuss this legislation through the eyes of SLNPD.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to the planning. Thank you to Director Rowe, Miriam, and Mr. Winkler for presenting for us. And I trust you'll be with us as we move through this. Okay. Colonel Chrisman?
Yeah, so is there a second presentation? I've reviewed the board bill. I've looked at both of them, 33 and 34. Is there a second presentation or
No, not at
okay,
this
cool.
time.
Okay.
Just
Okay.
wanted to, I know that from talking to Chief Tracy and Lieutenant Dan, I'm blanking on his last name now. Zarkis?
Jan Zerkis, yes.
Zarkis, yes. That SLNPD does have some incidents that they track directly to short-term rentals. And when I spoke to the chief yesterday, he said that someone would be able to speak to that. And so I was hoping that's you.
Sure. So again, I too want to thank everybody for this opportunity to speak today. We kind of always end up on, some of the back end of the bad behaviors of some of the short-term rentals. I know that, there's a lot of that looks like it's just a lot of times in the downtown west neighborhood, but I can tell you that we have incidents with short-term rentals across the city. And a lot of times they are lead to some violence and some bad acts. So we kind of find ourselves sometimes, we're not exactly sure all the time what to do as we're addressing some bad incidents. So we appreciate any effort to try to, license and track some of the short-term or all the short-term rentals across the city. So I think some of the things that we find is that when we talk about Airbnb and we talk about VRBNO or VRBO, that, most of those units are actually run well. And so a lot of times it's those units that haven't been registered anywhere. So to try to find the best ways to license those and to make sure that we have, good legislation around all of the units that are being, all of the locations that are being rented throughout the city. I think that starts to address this. And then, of course, what happens for units that aren't, that have not registered. So, and I think one of the things we might be missing in this, and I don't know if it's been considered, because of course, I know everybody's been working hard on this, are kind of some one night rentals. So I think a lot of times, most of our issues come through one night rentals. Those people that come in to rent a unit for one night just to have some sort of party, whether we've had lots of instances of graduation parties. We had a bachelorette or bachelor party recently that turned really violent as well. So like those are usually the circumstances that we're having more issues than some of the longer term rentals. I see it's up to a month, but the longer term rentals. So I don't know if any of that's been in the conversation. I think it could probably help us a little bit. I'm just not sure how all the legislation was done. And but I love the part about somebody that can be contacted immediately, that it has to be inside the apartment, so we know exactly who to call when we have an issue, what to do when things get out of hand. The noise indicators probably will work good for us. I know it's a recommendation. I think more of that and that kind of legislation, I think, could help us as we move forward. So we have been tracking the worst of the incidents for about the last 3 or 4 months, just to make sure that we know exactly kind of what locations we're having problems with. So, this is certainly a good first step. I know that Frank and his team will, have a lot of the work to do through the buildings division on this. So, but what we are normally looking for is we have an incident, we have a bad incident, and who to contact, how to contact them, and then what steps can happen to keep it from happening again.
Thank you, Colonel. So you mentioned the tracking of these incidents. Do we have a report from our police department on where the incidents related to short-term rentals are taking place, how often, and that sort of thing? If there's repeat offenders, if this is an issue of the same folks participating in this, by that I mean those renting and those renting their unit and those renting a space.
Yeah, we kind of have an informal tracking system that we just, that we've just kind of started, just because we, as we move into the summer months, we want to make sure that we know, kind of if we're having repeat instances. And we don't have a lot of repeat instances. Every once in a while we will with some of the larger buildings downtown. But for the most part, we're not having repeat bad nights or bad incidents at the same locations.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that a lot of these do come from just these one night rentals.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of an informal tracking of the incidents right now. We've kind of just been talking about them. We have a lot of morning crime meetings, and we talk about whether or not anybody's had a bad incident at a short-term rental.
thank you.
Mhm.
Alderman Ryan, did you have any further clarifications or questions for Colonel Priestman?
No, I don't. I know that through both her testimony today as well as other conversations that the police department's very much on board with some regulation of this, as the Lieutenant Colonel mentioned, also including, which is an amendment that will be coming forward to have 2-night minimums to
Okay, good.
these short-term rentals, so that I believe that should cut into a lot of the party house issues where people just want to have a venue to have a party, and it doesn't matter that it's in the middle of a residential neighborhood. But through both her testimony today and other conversations, it seems like everyone from the top brass all the way down to the boots on the ground are very much in favor of some sort of regulation here, and see these short-term rentals as a source of some of the issues in our community, and that we definitely need to get some regulation moving on them. So I thank her for her testimony today, and I don't have any further questions for her.
Thanks, Alderman.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderman Browning, did you have any questions for the Lieutenant Colonel?
No questions, thank you.
Okay, and I'm just so sorry, I'm seeing aldermen from other that are not on the committee. Alderman Clark Hubbard, I think I saw Alderman Aldrich on here earlier. Do we have any questions outside of the committee?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you for being here today. Lieutenant Colonel, I just have a question from your, outside of the one night and those other issues. I mean, do you see any other pieces that you'd like to see as part that would help our police department do your job easier? Is there anything else we can add from your perspective that we haven't thought through that you'd like to make a comment on?
I think, one of the things that kind of stands out as a plus, or the 4-unit minimum, I think that is an important part of this. We certainly had a building, a large multi-unit building in the downtown west neighborhood last year that we had a lot of issues with.
We're having a frozen.
Yeah.
Looks like we've lost our colonel there. Okay, she is popping back on. Okay, we lost you there. We got you back, but you're on mute.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
okay. So those minimum requirements of 4 units, I think, is going to be helpful for us. The best way to be able to communicate with somebody that is, the person to communicate with when we do have an incident. I think that's important too. And then, of course, what happens how do we report it, or what would be the expectation for us to report it? I'm assuming it goes to, Frank and his group when we do have an incident. What would be the expectations of our department when we do have an incident at a short-term rental? And I did not see that in there. I'm assuming that's just will be part of the larger plan. Because we certainly want to be, part of, creating safe and well-managed part-time or short-term rentals. So I think that reporting mechanism, and I'm assuming we would create it after it was, after the bills and finished. But, of course, we usually have the most information and to help with the problem property status.
But Vice Chair Spencer, if I may, I believe that the building division commissioner, Frank Oswald, is on the call. And I know
Mhm.
from previous conversations with him that he had been looking at various solutions for just that. If he could chime in here.
Sure.
Sure, yep, please.
Yeah, if that's okay. Yeah, Colonel, what the plan is basically is again to have, you know, an interactive website for the public to go ahead and register, pay for it online, all that stuff. The important aspect of it is that it's going to give us the, you know, my office, the authority to go ahead and condemn these units if they're illegally used for whatever purposes. I plan to have that website have a special section for your officers to give us contact information, you know, any information about something that occurred the previous night. We'll be able to exercise a condemnation on the spot, you know, and they can vacate that unit just like we do with any other type of illegal business. You know, and we'll have access to for the public to go ahead and put comments for any problems, noise issues, that type of stuff too. So I think, you know, with all this kind of stuff, we've got a pretty good history of being pretty good working with the police department and, you know, successful with the both of us getting stuff done. And I see this to be just a little extension of what we already do.
Okay, yeah, that sounds amazing. That, you know, that's kind of what I didn't want you to have to create another website, but that was, I mean, if there was a way that we could electronically, you know, access information and of course
Yeah.
add information. And then, you know, I'm also hopeful that those emergency contact numbers can be put at least on the law enforcement side of the website. So if it's not at the house or if it's not at the home, if we could try to find it, that's part of our challenge sometimes is that when we, first of all, you know, everybody always just assumes it's an Airbnb. Many times it's not. We do have you know, Airbnb does have a nice website that, you know, you can contact them and they'll give you information. A lot of our challenges sometimes is that they're not registered through, you know, Airbnb. So we don't have that emergency contact, but it really would help us to be able to easily access that. And so I appreciate your effort on that.
Well, and we really hope to prevent some of these issues to some extent because there are companies that actually control all these, and they troll these various websites and they charge you an annual fee, which isn't dirt cheap, but we're going to do that. And even your local small websites that are, you know, not the big ones that everybody normally looks for. And they're going to, on a daily basis, tell us who's out there advertising a party or advertising a room or that type of stuff. And if they don't have a license to do that, we have the authority under this legislation to go ahead and condemn it right away. And that way we can provide you guys that information as well. So it'll work both ways back and forth as it always does right now. So.
Okay. Okay. That's great. Thanks, Frank.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Frank. Alderman Ryan, did you have anything further for your presentation today?
I was just going to ask Frank to weigh in a little bit on basically exactly, or excuse me, Commissioner Oswald to weigh in on kind of exactly what he was saying with both the website on the back end, as well as some of these third-party vendors that if we have some buy-in from the platforms will really, really help with the enforcement mechanism here, both for the building division as well as SLMPD.
Yeah, and the beauty of having, you know, a professional web developer, you know, that we work with and stuff is that, you know, we've already contacted the big ones and they're more than willing to work with us. I don't think we'll have any problems with the big ones. You know, as the Colonel and you guys know, it's the smaller ones that generally create the situations that end up needing police in the middle of the night. So, but I think we'll have a handle on it.
Alderman Ryan, thank you, Frank. Thank you,
Mhm.
Commissioner Oswald. Do we have any further for your presentation today?
I don't have anything further. I just would like to, I guess if anyone has any questions for Commissioner Oswald, and then I would like to make sure that we hear from any members of the general public who may be on the call.
Okay, do we have any questions? Let's see, Alderman Browning,
No
Or-
questions at this time. Thank you.
Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. Still with us? Hearing no questions. All right, so from the public, I think we're gonna have, we have a few folks. We have somebody with their hand, a couple folks with their hand raised over there. Their hand raisings come in order here. So Madam Clerk, can we pull folks over? Or I guess if the clerk is pulling folks over one at a time. All right, so we'll go with, I believe it was Caleb who came on first. Caleb Doyle, would you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. You may proceed. And I'm going to give you 3 minutes so we have some level of level playing field. And I'll remind you that at the end, if you don't cover everything you'd like, you can submit your comments to the board via our email. We'll make sure you have that, and they'll be part of our official documentation for the considerations, the committee.
Great. Well, thank you all for the opportunity to speak and for taking action on what I think is a very important issue. I'm coming here to speak not as an expert on anything, but just as a neighbor, as a citizen. I'm strongly in support of any regulations on short-term rentals in our city. I think everyone has done a great job addressing the potential issues that could arise, violence, those sorts of things that everyone worries about when this comes about. But speaking as a neighbor, I'm living in Ward 6, Tower Grove South on the Morgan Ford side, and I just watched while the last 16 months or so, some contractors were completely gutting and rehabbing a 4-family across the street from me on Juniata. And I was really excited because we were going to get some new neighbors and some, affordable, relatively affordable housing for some new people to live. And come to find out, it's become an Airbnb. All 4 units of it are being rented out. And so it hasn't been a problem yet. I'm firmly a believer that let's not make things a problem until they become a problem, right? But there are certainly those fears in the back of my mind of what that could become. And I think on a different level, it's just, it's annoying, right? It kind of disturbs the peace of the neighborhood in a way. Neighbors treat each other with respect. We treat the neighborhood with respect. There's a certain way that we behave. We know we've learned how to park on the streets correctly, right? We know how to leave enough space for our neighbors, how to have the proper amount of noise, not be yelling and carrying on outside our houses. So I think even that there haven't been any major issues yet. I think there's always that potential for that to happen. And just on a grander scale, neighborhoods are not businesses. I know everybody wants to look at it from the perspective of the realtors who are pouring money in this to quote unquote improve the neighborhoods, but neighborhoods are for neighbors, right? It's for people who need housing, which is a desperate need in our city, affordable housing. And so I think I wanted to add my 2 cents to the din to say that I am strongly in support of any regulations that the city of St. Louis can impose on short-term rentals. Overarching, I don't think this is an issue that this body can solve, but I'm in favor of abolition of these things. I think they take affordable housing away from people who need it. They take tax dollars away from these schools that need it in the areas. But of course, now I'm circumambulating. Just want to say thank you. I'm strongly in support of the regulations on short-term rentals.
Thank you, Caleb. And I believe up next, I think is maybe Sharon Ware. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay,
Sure,
Sharon,
thank you.
if you don't mind, would you, thank you, Caleb, really appreciate your time and your thoughts.
Shannon Ware, currently live in Shaw, in the process of relocating.
Sharon,
to Fox
if you don't
Park.
mind,
I'm sorry.
Sharon, if you don't mind, just a moment, I'll have you raise your right hand. We'll swear you
Oh,
in. You swear to tell the truth? I think that's your left hand, Sharon. I don't know that it matters, but,
Okay, that is my right hand, but
oh, you must have a mirror turned on. All right.
yes.
Or no, I guess maybe I'm turned around, whatever. In any case,
Yes, I will tell the truth.
do you swear to tell? Okay, thank you so much. If you don't mind identifying yourself, and then I'll give you 3 minutes.
Shannon Ware, currently live in Shaw and in the process of relocating to a new building I purchased in Fox Park. And I do see these as a huge problem. And I thank you for addressing it. One question I have is, I haven't seen anybody talk about the difference between a hotel, a motel, and a boarding house. And there are existing ordinances for all of those. So that's one question I have. And I noticed on the boarding house ordinance, there's a process where people have to get permission of neighbors, just like for many things, to open one up. And why are we going to address something like that in the short-term rental thing? Because if nobody wants them there, they shouldn't be there. Because I haven't seen much good come out of these things when they're in residential neighborhoods. That's really my comment. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Sharon. Go ahead. And our next person up, I believe, would be William Shuhai. Just going in order here. Is there a William Shuhai?
Yes.
Okay, William, do you have a camera that you can use, or?
Oh, I apologize. I must have it off.
If you want to turn it on, you're welcome to.
Sorry, I wasn't prepared, Alderwoman.
No worries.
Do you want to skip me and come back? Do you have anyone waiting?
Sure. I think we have a Dr. Carrie Wojciechowski.
That is me.
All right, Dr. Wojciechowski, would you mind, do you swear to tell the truth?
I do. Swear to tell the truth.
Excellent. Covering both bases. Excellent. All
Yes.
right. If you don't mind identifying yourself, and I'll give.
So my name is
Yeah, 3 minutes.
Dr. Carrie Wojciechowski, and I'm a resident of Southwest Garden neighborhood. I went to the previous meeting and have read through the legislation. Today, I was reading through Kansas City's legislation. Some of the things that I've seen there, because they put it together and then they had to amend it. I would like to see, they have added density limits. So I understand that we have determined that these STRs are good for land use considerations. However, I want to point out that that's only in terms of lower densities. If you have a whole block that's an STR, or even 2, 3, 4 on the same block, what you're ending up with is you're losing your cohesive neighborhood. If I leave my garage door open, who's going to tell me if I have an STR on either side? Again, it makes a difference with the schools. Those are families who are not living in the city and sending their kids to schools. So the city is losing funding for those schools. And just in general, it's just a thing about neighbors looking out for one another and keeping in the cohesiveness. I also want to emphasize the 2-night stay. I think that is definitely necessary. I know Alderman Narayan said that they were going to add that. I personally would like to see only owner occupied STRs in residential areas. Or if there is a non-residential STR, I would like to see a plat and petition approval from the neighbors in order to allow that STR to be approved. And I believe that was one of the conditions that Kansas City put forth, was that 55% of the residents had to approve a non-owner occupied STR. I'm definitely for putting forth some regulations on these, but as the legislation is currently written, and I think you guys realize this as well, there's a lot of loopholes in there for people to get around the regulations, and it's not quite going to do what we want it to do. So thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to finding out when the next meeting is.
Okay. Thank you so much. And next up, we do have Mr. Shuhai, if you would like to join, if you're able to. If you're not able to turn your camera on, we can deal. We'll just have to make sure that you're promising to raise your right hand.
I am promising to raise my right hand. I have tried everything to, it says it's on, Alderwoman, so I apologize.
Well, you're looking gloomy. All right, Mr. Shuhai, would you swear to tell the truth?
I do.
Okay, excellent. You've got 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'm a registered lobbyist for Expedia Group and Verbo here in Jefferson City, and I've had the opportunity to work on short-term rental ordinances in Kansas City and Springfield and Columbia, and the earlier iteration of the ordinance here in St. Louis, working with Alderwoman Navarro and Alderwoman Ingracia. We rise today in support of this effort. We do think that this is a strong first take. I think one of the things I've learned in working with the other cities in Missouri is, we've made mistakes. It's kind of a trial and error. Just to point out, the original ordinance in Kansas City was a single ordinance that had both zoning and enforcement under the planning department. They realized that was a mistake. And in the newly revised ordinance that they passed last month, those duties were split out, much as you have split them out in board bills 33 and 34. So I think that's a really wise approach. In listening to the testimony a couple of weeks ago and attending the numerous town hall meetings over the years in St. Louis, I do think density is an issue that we could probably work with you on. Alderman Narayan has been very good about reaching out to the platforms for input, and we hear the constituents, and that might be a way we can improve this bill. But I just want to convey to you that as a platform, we're committed to working with you on a successful implementation, working with you to make sure compliance is quick and brings relief to citizens like Caleb who've had to deal with these issues in their neighborhoods. As a board, you have to balance private property rights with neighborhood integrity and peaceable enjoyment. I think this is a really good first start. I commend you, and we want to be a resource in the process.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Shuhai. I did not realize that you were a representative. I will say I'd like to request of you to come before this committee and answer questions. It's on my list of things that I would like to have the platforms here, at least the two big ones you mentioned that you represent, VRBO and Airbnb. I will say, for somebody who represents the interest of some big tech and in short-term rentals, hopefully we can get your own personal tech working for next time so that we can see you and interact with you more effectively.
Sure. I was at the last hearing, Alderwoman, and have already expressed to Alderman Narayan and folks in the mayor's office my willingness to testify in person. So at your disposal.
Okay, thank you. I don't think we had the pleasure of meeting, but I'm glad that you spoke with those other folks. I do think it's important that we be able to ask you questions. I think I'm glad to hear that you're in support of this. I would like to have some discussions about some data sharing and some, making sure that that not only our city, but members of the community have full understanding of who's participating under what circumstances with your platforms. I think that data sharing is incredibly important to kind of crowdsourcing some of the compliance issues that the city of St. Louis is currently experiencing, and making sure our police department and our nuisance property division has full access to all of that information as well. So I welcome a conversation in the coming weeks as we kind of move forward with some the committee substitute that the sponsor of the bill mentioned in the front end of this committee meeting.
I think that's wise. We had a implementation phone call with city staff in Kansas City yesterday on data. So we'll be prepared to have those conversations.
Yeah, Mr. Shuhai, if you don't mind sharing with us what information you're sharing with other cities, not you, but the platforms that you represent are sharing with other cities, and the transparency with which you're doing that, and the regular, how often that's happening, it'd be very helpful. And so recognizing now that you'll be available to answer questions, I'd like to be prepared for our next hearing to have a moment to have some direct testimony from the platforms, either from you or from representatives directly of those companies, and to be able to ask questions of you.
Just to clarify, ma'am, I represent Expedia Group and Verbo. Verbo is
Oh,
a
okay.
part of the Expedia Group family.
Sure.
I do not represent Airbnb.
Okay, my misunderstanding.
No
there.
problem. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. With that, recognizing that, just quickly, do we have any questions from the committee, from Mr. Shuhai, Alderman Browning?
Hear from him in the future though, and Mr. Shuhai, I do think we have had the pleasure of meeting, so I appreciate you being here and being involved in this.
Thank you.
Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. And Alderman Narayan, did you have anything further for us today?
No, if that concludes the public testimony, it was always the goal to hear from the platforms. And as I told Mr. Shuhai previously, I just wanted to make sure that we were hearing from the residents of our community before we were hearing from the platforms, because as much as I love Airbnb and Verbo and all those big tech companies, the people who live in my community's voice is far more important to me. So I think it was important to make sure that we heard from the stakeholders who look out their front doors and see these, rather than out of town and corporate interests in our neighborhoods. Their buy-in is certainly important, because we need them to have some buy-in on the enforcement side. And that's why we need to work with them to make sure that we come up with legislation that everyone can live with, from the residents to the operators to the platforms, because we're going to need all three of those entities to be on board if we're going to be successful with this legislation and the enforcement of it through our building division and through our police department. It's become very clear to me throughout this process. I kind of picked up a torch and continued running with it, that had been this legislation is certainly not new. One of the issues with it is that tech moves faster than government, and that's just the reality of the situation. One of the sayings in tech is move fast and break things, and that's not what we do in government. At least we try very hard to not do that in government. If anything, what we typically hear from our colleagues down here at the board is to slow down and to make sure that we're not making a misstep. And when we balance those two things, I wanted to make sure that we were hearing from the individuals affected by these short-term rentals, and make sure that that's what was setting the stage for our discussions with the platforms. Now I think we've had adequate opportunity for people, both for and against these regulations. Today, it seems like most of who we've heard was very much in favor of these regulations. However, in the first meeting that we had, there were several operators who didn't see a need for this, or didn't care for the specifics on it. Some of the folks here today don't believe that this regulation goes far enough. And so we certainly have a balancing act that we have to try and carry out here. And I'm certainly committed to continuing to Alderman Hubbard. I'm certainly committed to trying to continue that work. We'll be coming forward with a committee sub that's going to be taking into account some of the feedback that we've heard today, and from the realtors, from the platforms, from the individuals affected by these, and we'll bring it back before this committee, and I assume we'll have more discussions on that. And if we keep on working on it, we'll get it right. And with that, if there's no more public comment, I'll yield and I'll yield back to the chair.
Thank you, Alderman Orion. I just want to acknowledge, yeah, it's been mentioned a couple of times. We have some public comment in a form of a white paper from the Realtors Association as well. We have public comment from at least one other member of the public, Susan Flair, who submitted a letter to the committee. There's been a request of the clerk to see if there's been any other public testimony that we can add to the public comment and make sure that the committee is aware of and does their due diligence to read. With that, I appreciate that, Alderman Orion. I'm really grateful that we're not seeking a vote today, that we're continuing to have these hearings, and look forward to providing that space during the summer break. I'm committed to continuing this discussion as we move forward with the comments and concerns that we are considering. With that, I think we can wrap up this committee hearing. Seeing no more items on our agenda to discuss, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
One second, Alderwoman Spencer, could we excuse Alderwoman Velasquez for missing the meeting?
Yes, thank you, Alderman Browning. I'll take excused absences. I appreciate you mentioning that. Alderwoman Velasquez, and I believe Alderman Cone would get an excused absence as well, and I'll take a motion on that. But the problem will be, I think, Alderman Browning, that we don't have quorum to take a vote.
Right.
So those will be noted in the notes. Okay, with that, I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Yep, thank you all for being here today. I really appreciate the thoughtful testimony and the questions that we had on Board Bills 33 and 34. And with that, this concludes the committee hearing.
Thank you all.